All right, the second part of 3.3 is when we are going to start factoring. And I do have a typo here. This should say factor, not whatever this word is. Okay, so if you get stuck on these, go back to the flow chart, see if that helps you get out of the spot that you are stuck in. With this, we are going to start with A. So looking at our flow chart, the first thing we want to check for is, can it be written in an x squared equals k setup? That is not going to be possible here because we have an x squared and an x. So that means no, it cannot. So we're going to go down to the next one. The next thing we need to factor out is our GCF, or your greatest common factor. If you have anything that's an x squared, if you have an x squared plus 2x plus 4, if that number in front of the x squared is 1, your GCF is going to be 1. So then you can just jump down to the next one. If it was instead a 6x squared plus 2x plus 4, all of the numbers, the 6, 2, and 4, are divisible by 4. By 2. So that means our GCF, well, it does not let me write very nice, is 2. And you would be able to factor that out to leave it as 3x squared plus an x plus 2. Okay, so if there's a 1 in front, your GCF is going to be 1. If there's a different number up front, you are going to check for the largest number you can divide all of the coefficients by. Yeah, so if we look at example 4a, this one has a 1 up front. So that means our GCF is 1. We can move on to the next step. Then the next thing you're going to look at are the first and the last terms perfect squares. By perfect squares, we are thinking of numbers like 1, 4, because 2 times 2 is 4, or we're thinking of 9, because 3 times 3 is 9, 25, because 5 times 5 is 25, oh, I forgot 16, 4 times 4 is 16. That is what I mean by perfect squares. So if we look at this one, x squared, that is a perfect square because x times x is x squared. And then the 14, that is not a perfect square because it's not simplified. We can't simplify it if we were to take the square root. So we're going to go over to the no side. Then we are going to check, is factoring by splitting possible? That is the method that I'm going to go over for factoring. If you choose to use a different method, that is okay. This is the one that I'm going to use and have on the answer key. So for factoring by splitting, you are going to have it set up where you have the same setup as any quadratic, where in standard form, where you have ax squared plus bx plus c. We are going to split the b value. So that is what we are splitting, because it's called AC split. We're going to split b into two numbers that have the following. So there's two things that it needs. One, they have to add to our b value. And then 2, they have to multiply to equal a times c. That is what we're going to do. So let's start with that step. So first, we are going to split that b value into two numbers that are add to b and multiply to ac. So looking at our equation, our a value is 1, b is -9, and c is 14. A times c equals 1 times 14, or 14. B equals -9. So we're looking for two numbers that multiply to 14 and add to -9. So because they multiply to a positive number, I know that either both need to be positive or both be negative. Because they add to a negative, I need two negative numbers. So 14, I know we could have -1, -14. We could also have -2, -7. Those are the only factors of 14. We need two that add up to -7 or -9. -1 and -14, that doesn't work. -2, -7, that adds up to -9. So we're going to split this middle term into -2x and -7x. The rest stays the same. So we keep the x squared in the front and we keep that 14 equals 0. Okay. If you're able to find a pair that makes this true, that means we are able to factor by splitting. So we're going to continue to factor by splitting. The next step after you split that middle term, so step 2 here, you are going to write an equation as 4 terms. So that's what we just did over there. So we're going to write equation as 4 terms. Then we're going to factor out the GCF, or greatest common factor, from the first 2 terms then the last 2 terms. So if we look at ours, we're going to factor out the GCF from these first 2 terms, x squared minus 2x. So let's start with the numbers. We know the coefficient in front of x squared is 1. So the largest number that we can factor out from a 1 and a -2 is going to be 1. Then we are going to look, do both of them have an x with them? Looking at this, we have an x squared and a minus 2x. That means we can take out 1x, or an x, from that set of parentheses. So if we are factoring out an x, it's like we're dividing by what we factored out. So x squared divided by a 1x, we would be left with x. A -2x divided by a 1x, we would be left with a -2. Now we're going to do the exact same thing, but for the second pair, or the last 2 terms in our equation. So for this one, looking again, we have a -7x and a +14. If that first one in the group is negative, you are going to factor out the negative with it. We need to think of the largest number we can divide 7 and 14 by, and that is going to be 7. Only the 7x, the -7x, has an x. The 14 doesn't, so we can't factor out an x with it. So in our parentheses now, if we have -7x divided by -7, that will be x. And then 14 divided by -7 would equal -2. All right. Once you are here, we are going to factor out for step 3. And I will type these up and write them a little bit nicer since it's not showing up the best on this PDF. You're going to factor out the common factor. If we look, our common factor here is this x minus 2. So we're going to factor that out into the front of our problem, x minus 2. So if we pull the x minus 2 out to the front of our problem, we are going to have an x and a -7 remaining. Those are both going to go into their own set of parentheses, so x minus 7, and that will equal 0. This is how you would factor by splitting. Then the next thing you are going to look on this flow chart is, are you solving? And the directions were factor, then solve. So looking at this, yes, we are solving. So we need to set each factor equal to 0 and solve. sorry, that solve got cut off here. So now each set of parentheses, that is a factor. We're going to set both of them equal to 0. So x minus 2 equals 0 and x minus 7 equals 0. We're going to solve each equation, so we'll add 2 to both sides. Make sure you're using inverse operations here. That is a common mistake that people do, and then they get the wrong sign on their answer. Same thing for the next one, inverse operations, add 7 to both sides, and we get our second answer of x equals 7. That would be the end of this problem when we're factoring by splitting.